Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have another book review for you, and that is for Star Wars Red Harvest by Joe Schreiber. Now, this is a Star Wars Legends book, or EU. It is one of the earlier books in the continuity. It takes place in the Old Republic era, which is a few thousand years prior to the movies. I don't know exactly when it takes place, but considering a few of the in-universe events that are mentioned, I would say it takes place somewhere around the time of the Old Republic video game, considering it mentions the sacking of Coruscant, which happens in the book Deceived, which takes place, I think, shortly before the Old Republic video game. So this probably takes place around that time, right in the midst of the Old Republic era. And kind of the premise of this book is a little bit silly. It's basically a Star Wars zombie book. It basically asks the question, what if a Sith Lord decided that he was going to try to achieve immortality, as many other Sith Lords have done, including Palpatine, and said, what if he was trying to achieve immortality and accidentally created a zombie virus that turns people into zombies? And that's pretty much all this book is about. So starting off with positives with this book, this was just such an entertaining read for me. I just had such a blast with it, even though the premise is admittedly pretty silly, especially for Star Wars. And, you know, if you're not really into horror or anything like that, which I'm not super into horror, but if you kind of look at that and you think, zombies in Star Wars doesn't feel like it fits to me, but for me, it really worked. It was just such a fun read. It was very fast-paced. It was very action-packed. And I really enjoyed that about it. I also think that the horror elements in this were actually handled really well. I am one of those people where I see Star Wars and horror being combined. I'm kind of like, be careful with that, because for me, horror and Star Wars don't feel like they should mix. There are cases where it's been done very well. For example, one of the other books that this author wrote, Mall Lockdown, which is the only one that I've read by him, he wrote that one as well as Death Troopers, which I have not yet read. And this is also, from what I've heard, kind of a prequel to Death Troopers, which is kind of cool. Mall Lockdown had some very violent and horrific moments in it, but I think those were handled really well. You have Star Wars The Fallen Star, which is one of the books in the High Republic, had some more horror elements in it, which I really liked. So horror and Star Wars can mix well. And I think this is one of those cases where, yeah, it's kind of cheesy horror, you know, it's zombies, but I think it was done really well. And really, in terms of positives, that's all I really have to say about this book, because even though it's not a lot of positives, I think they are very big ones for me. This was just such a fun, entertaining read that I just loved, and it's a very short book. It's one of the shortest Star Wars novels ever written. I believe it was like 250, 260 pages, which Star Wars novels are not that long most of the time, but this is like one of, if not the shortest of the EU books, as far as I can think of. But all of it was just packed with action and excitement, and it was just such a fun read. Even though it was really short, it just really packed the short length that it has with just a lot of stuff that was a lot of fun. In terms of negatives with this book, there's not a whole lot that I really didn't like, because I actually really loved this book, which I didn't expect going into it. I figured I would like it. I hoped I would like it, as I do with every book that I go into, but I didn't expect to absolutely love it like I did. So there's not really a lot of big negatives that I can think of. However, the characters don't really get much development. They do get a little bit. You do know a little bit about these characters, but considering this is a zombie story where a lot of people die, you don't get a lot of development for really any of the characters, which could be a bad thing if you're a big character reader, and I really enjoy characters. That's the big thing that I'm really into with books most of the time, but I honestly didn't mind it because it was just so action-packed, and this wasn't really a character book anyway, so kind of keeping in mind also the intention of the book, it wasn't really meant to focus on the characters. It was meant to be horrifying and action-packed and all that stuff. So it didn't really bother me, but it would have been cool to get a little more character development, but I think ultimately that would have weighed some other parts of the book down, honestly. But that is pretty much it in terms of positives and negatives. Overall, in case you can't tell, I really enjoyed this book. I did not expect to love it as much as I did, but it is right now one of my favorite Legends books that I've read, which is weird considering that it is a Star Wars zombie story, which just sounds ridiculous to me. But I had such a blast reading this book. I got through it in 2 hours, which for me, first of all, I have never read a book that fast in terms of novels, and also I have never gotten through a novel in one sitting before, as far as I can think of at least. So I really enjoyed this one, and granted, that also comes down to the length, considering this is a super short book, but I just could not put it down. I had such a blast reading it. It was so much fun. It was so entertaining. I just had a really great time with it, even though it didn't really have much character development. The plot is super simplistic. It's just Star Wars in a dark side academy type of setting where there's dark side force users and a zombie outbreak happens. And that's basically the entire plot of this book, summed up. But it was so much fun to read. I had such a great time reading it. And yeah, it was just a super entertaining read. As far as a rating out of 10, I would probably honestly give this like a 9 or a 9.5. Because again, even though it didn't have a lot of the stuff that I typically look for in books, including in Star Wars books, it was just so much fun to read. And in terms of pure enjoyment value, this one was super high for me. So 9.5 out of 10, somewhere in there. Not necessarily the most perfect book I've ever read in terms of characters, in terms of plot, all that stuff. But again, just as far as pure entertainment value, I just had so much fun with this book. But anyways, that's pretty much it for this video. Let me know down in the comments if you have read this one, if you happen to love it as much as I did. I have not heard a lot of people talk about this book, let alone in as positive of a light as I think that it deserves. So I think this is like a super underrated Star Wars book now. So let me know down in the comments if you've read it, if you really loved it as much as I did, if you maybe didn't really care for it that much, if you are one of those people who doesn't really like the combination of Star Wars and horror. How do you think it handled that? Because I think it handled it really well. But let me know down in the comments all of that stuff. And that's pretty much it for this video, so thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time.